We're on now.
Good morning. Welcome to the Tuesday morning Q&A. And Mike and I are here again today. Mike is one of the pastors here at Westway, and I'm one of the pastors here at Westway. And we're here to discuss questions from the Sunday service. And there weren't any questions again.
Well, we still call it a Q&A, so.
Yes, we do. And I guess we did get a question this morning that was discussed at home on Sunday evening. I think it was Sunday evening at John and Ann's house. And so we'll discuss that today.
We sure can.
You notice I'm wearing a sweatshirt and Mike's wearing a sweater.
It's a little chilly.
It is a lot chilly out there today. Damp chilly. That's almost colder than dry chilly. And I'm not ready for it.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just such a big shift from like 105 Friday or Saturday.
Yeah.
To, I don't know what it actually got down to last night. It was cold.
It was below 40 when I went out this morning, early this morning. And it got lower below 40 before I came here this morning. So
yeah, I don't think it's much past that still.
Right around that stage, yeah. It was close to 90 yesterday.
Yeah. But
windy.
Yeah, it's been a pretty abrupt shift. I was out here yesterday afternoon when it was dropping.
Yes.
And it got really windy, and the garden is all tarped over, and the tarps were blowing up into the air. And I mean, they're anchored down, but I don't know what the tarps look like this morning. I'm guessing a little shredded. But.
Hopefully they didn't have to go across the road to find them.
Yeah.
I was out in the country yesterday at my kids' place, and it dropped pretty quickly, and it's windier in the country than it is in town. Even behind their shelter belt.
Yeah. So we started a new series this Sunday, going through the book of Malachi, and we kind of couched that within the framework of the first few verses of Psalm 78.
Yeah.
Which that psalm really outlines the history of Israel from their departure from Egypt when they were slaves. Mm-hmm. So the Exodus out of Egypt, crossing the Red Sea, wandering through the desert, establishing themselves as a nation, up through the time of basically King David, when they were established as a nation. And that whole time period was filled with kind of a generational pattern of following God, not following God.
Yeah.
Following God's laws, not following God's laws. And over and over and over, we see back and forth between the people of Israel living faithfully in the covenant that they had made with God, that their ancestors had made with God, and abandoning that covenant. Or maybe abandoning is a strong word. There probably was some abandoning. I think more there was drifting away from.
Yeah.
To the point where they didn't even realize they were abandoning at some point the covenant that their ancestors had made with God and that God had made with them. So that's where we started. Malachi wrote at a time much later, after the nation of Israel had been split into two. The northern tribes had been taken off into captivity in Assyria and dispersed throughout the Assyrian Empire. Later, the southern tribes had been captured by Babylon and taken captive. Babylon kind of took the sort of the upper crust of everybody in the society of Judah and took them back, and they were slaves captive in Babylon for 70 years. And then they started to migrate back to their homeland and found their nation was decimated. The people had had drifted further and further and further from any semblance of their national identity. And so they found a mess when they returned from Babylon. We read about that, like Ezra, Nehemiah, their stories of returning from exile in Babylon and rebuilding the nation, or at least beginning to rebuild the nation, starting in Jerusalem. So they rebuilt the city, tried to re-energize the nation and re-establish themselves even as a nation, even while they were under the rule of now the Persian Empire, which sort of took over that area from the Babylons.
Yep.
And Malachi writes at a point in Jewish history when, I guess I wouldn't say that they had given up all hope, because there were still those that were very zealous for, even in Jesus' day, for their national identity. But it seemed that the nation of Israel had seen its better days and they were never returning.
Would you say that their desire was to keep their nationality and their identity, but it wasn't for the right purpose or the right reasons?
Yeah, probably. I mean, we all gravitate toward people that are like us, and we want to be a part of something on a large scale. We want to be a part of a nation that matters, and they wanted to be a nation. But they were very... I mean, at this point in history, they are a nation that had been ruled by one oppressor after another for most of their last several centuries. And obviously there were those that wanted to get rid of any kind of foreign occupation. But I think most of the people had sort of acquiesced to, this is just our lot in life. And they were... maybe they weren't satisfied, but they had resigned themselves to living a life as a nation that was much less than what God intended. And I think we do that.
Yeah.
We resign ourselves to less than God's best, and we accept inferior, I guess, ways of living.
Without even knowing it, I think, in a lot of ways. What motivated them, and I think what motivates us, is us and not God a lot of times.
There definitely can be a self-centered nature to our existence if we're not careful.
Yeah, yeah.
And if we don't intentionally drive that out, we will gravitate toward ourselves. We will gravitate around ourselves, and everything in my life becomes about me. What do I want? What do I think I need? What makes me feel good? What pleases me? And in that state, the nation of Israel, they made a lot of bad decisions, and decisions that took them further from being the nation of maybe world blessers that they were intended to be.
Yeah.
When God initially chose and made a promise to Abraham, he said, I'm going to make you a great nation. And through that nation, I will bless the world, all the other nations.
Yeah.
It was very easy for them to come to identify themselves as the chosen ones, but forget what they were chosen for. And I think we in the church can be in that same boat if we're not careful. It is great that we've been chosen by God to be transformed by his son. But we are not chosen just for our own benefit. We are chosen in order that we as a body can put God on display and share his love with the people around us, and really still that same promise to bless every other nation on the planet.
Yeah, and
that's what we're chosen for.
And it's just interesting when the leaders of those countries understood that and did that, it blessed the whole nation. When I've been reading through the Chronicles, and you have those kings that turned to God and sought God with their whole heart, and when that happened, the king was blessed, but not only the king, but the whole nation was blessed, and other nations around them were blessed. And so there's that pattern also that's there, and it's that unselfish nature of his people, that when we realize it's not about us, it's about him, then he can take that soil, if you will, that ability of those individuals to allow him to do his work and bless others because of it.
So Malachi wrote a lot pretty pointedly at those leaders,
right?
The priests and Levites, because they were in charge of the sacrificial system, and they were not leading the people well. They were allowing the people to bring, Malachi said, defiled sacrifices. So here's the thing. In the covenant that God made with Abraham and with his descendants, which is what the Israelites were, God says, here's my promise, and here are the terms of that promise. Here are the people, the parties that are involved in that. This is between me, God, and you, the people of Israel. The sacrificial system that they lived within was a part of that covenant. They were required to bring sacrifices, and they were required to bring the first, the best, to be sacrificed. Now, if I'm gravitated around myself, I don't want to sacrifice my best. I want to sacrifice my leftovers. And that seems to be where the priests had led the people. Take care of yourself and give God something that will come close to fulfilling the letter of the law.
It's interesting to me too. Sorry, didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But the leaders that he speaks to are the religious leaders, which in that time, within the children of Israel, they were the leaders of them also.
Right. The priests and the Levites were the leaders. The Levites were ostensibly like the workers of the temple.
Right.
But they fit within that structure of, like, everything in their society revolved around the temple.
Yes.
And so if you're the leader in the temple, you're the leader of everything. And the priests specifically were called out by not only Malachi, but in several other instances in the Old Testament, the priests were called out pretty harshly for the way they had failed to shepherd the people of God. Those warnings later in the New Testament were carried over and used as kind of an example for us in the church. Those in church leadership today, not that the church is the center of our society by any stretch of the imagination, and that's a whole other discussion of whether it really ever was or should be or should have been. But today it's not.
Right.
And despite that, there is still a group of people within our culture that have a very high respect for church leaders. And leadership in the church needs to pay very close attention to the warnings that the Old Testament prophets often gave leadership in the temple. Because if they were getting called out for their lack of shepherding and actual care for the flock of Israel, we need to be really careful about how we are handling that on our own. Go ahead.
I think about, as we think about those leaders and the responsibility that they had, and how often in the scripture God compares our family or the church to the family. And how, for me, as the leader of my family, what I teach my children and they pass on to their children is going to set their social structure in a lot of ways. It's going to have a great effect on how their homes operate and possibly even the communities around them that they're involved with.
Sure. And I think, like, we want to be careful because it's very easy for us to beat ourselves up when things go sideways. But I think of, like, Solomon. You mentioned him earlier. Solomon was given this opportunity at a moment in time where he was able to ask for anything.
Yeah.
And he asked God to give him wisdom, to make him a wise ruler. Meaning, make me a ruler that is going to lead your people closer to your heart. Make me a good shepherd that makes good decisions, because I recognize there are people following and affected by the decisions that I make.
Yeah.
So you would think if anyone would have children who continue in that line, it would have been the wisest man ever. But the wisest man ever, when he passed away, his empire began to crumble because of decisions that his children made.
Yeah.
And specifically, Rehoboam, his next son, made some terrible leadership decisions.
Right off the bat.
Instead of accepting, and this is where we can really tie in a little bit, instead of accepting wisdom from those with experience, I've heard what you have to say, but I'm going to gather around me my buddies who all are kind of at a similar stage in life as I am.
And they know me.
And I'm going to see what they think. And instead, like, it was almost diametrically opposite of what the wise leaders of Solomon's generation had to say. Here's what you should do to lead the people well.
Yeah.
But Rehoboam, as he gathered his cadre of people around him, they said, no, you should be more harsh. You got to lay the smack down right away from the beginning. Let people know how it's going to be. It's going to be your way or no way. And Rehoboam chose that path and lost everything because of it. That was the son of the wisest man. So when my children make decisions that I would rather they have not made, I can beat myself up about that, thinking what a failure I am as a father. But the truth is, your kids, my kids, everybody's kids, they have the free will to choose to follow the ways that we teach them or not. And I strive to live my life according to the ways that I teach. If my actions don't match my words, then nobody should follow me.
Right.
I strive to make sure that the things that I tell my kids to do, I put those into practice and exemplify those and show them this is how this works out. Life as a disciple is not always easy, but you're always cared for by the God who called you. And if they choose otherwise, I know it will not be, or at least I intend that it will not be, because they saw Dad saying one thing and living a completely different way. Having said that, it is still very easy to think, what did I do wrong, when our kids choose things that we don't want them to choose.
That's our first tendency.
And I don't want to lay like any kind of guilt on anybody here in this series or in what we're talking about today. The choices of the next generation are up to the next generation. Your role, my role, is to put God on display as best as we can and allow them the freedom to choose him. But we want to make sure that they see him clearly. Because today, there are a lot of young generations who have rejected a God that they've never actually experienced clearly. They've never seen him clearly because they've only seen warped and weakened counterfeits of what God really is.
Yeah.
And we want to make sure, and part of what this series is all about is making sure that we put him on display as clearly as possible so that if they reject God, they're actually rejecting God as he is, not as he has been incorrectly portrayed by our lives.
Yeah, we have a tremendous responsibility to do it well, so that when they come to the point in time where they need to make that choice, they've been taught well, and the choice is clear.
So that kind of leads to the question that you mentioned earlier, which was,
how do we take what we read in Malachi? That word Malachi always makes me think of Malachi. I have a grandson named Malachi, and we call him Malachi. But how do we take what we read in Malachi? By the way, read the first 2 chapters this week as you prepare for Sunday morning. But how do we take that and the things that it's speaking to the children of Israel and apply it to where we're at today?
So, for example, he talks a lot about the sacrifices that they were offering, defiling the altar.
Yeah.
Well, how have we defiled the altar? You bring sacrifices that are lame and broken and worthless.
Yeah.
When I deserve the firstborn. I deserve the unblemished lamb. Well,
when's the last time you did a sacrifice?
Offer lambs as a sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so it would be easy for us to say, that's not relevant to us. That's talking about the sacrificial system that Jesus did away with that. We don't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But we are called to be a living sacrifice, like our very selves. Offer Paul said in Romans, offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So, what does that look like?
Yeah. And so I don't know how much we want to talk about that now, or how much you're going to talk about it on Sunday, or I'm going to talk about it the next week. But it goes on, and holy and acceptable and pleasing, so that we might know his perfect will. And what that means is, are we seeking him? Really? When we offer ourselves as a sacrifice, that means we're putting him first. And we're sacrificing ourselves, our nature, our desires, to please him in what we do and say. And the beautiful thing is when we do that, then he blesses. In so many ways.
And just like Israel, we are called not to be collectors of those blessings, but conduits of those blessings.
Yeah.
They began to wander when they started to see themselves as benefactors of those blessings, or beneficiaries of those blessings, instead of we are passing these blessings on to the world. And I think one of the things that we mentioned on Sunday, just real briefly, was how the pace of change, and coupled with the extended life expectancies, have caused what used to be a generation gap to be sort of, I guess, exponentially grown. We have, instead of basically 3 generations experience a generation gap, we have 5 different generations gathered together. And that doesn't happen in a lot of places, but it does happen in the church.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think one of the things that we want to celebrate is how we are able to grow past those generation gaps in the church because of what Christ has done.
Yeah, yeah.
And we want to work together to make sure that every generation is passing on the blessings of God to the people around us. So when we talk about what's happening in Malachi, dealing with their sacrificial system, and we don't have to worry about that, but we do have other obstacles that threaten to pull us away from giving God our best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's what he deserves. He doesn't deserve...
Yeah.
He deserves more than my leftovers.
Right. Right.
He asks for me to give him myself as a living sacrifice, to do whatever he wants to do with. Not just like, well, I got this to do and these things to do, and I really want to do this, but if I have time, then I'll volunteer and whatever. God deserves to be the priority in our lives. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about different service opportunities in the church, we don't ever want that to be just like a give us your leftover time kind of thing.
Yeah.
But how can you make God your priority by serving in the nursery or teaching first graders or opening doors? How do we proclaim God by taking attendance and helping people park cars and find seats? Those aren't just like leftover activities that we can fill a few minutes with. These are ways when we declare God's priority in our lives. It would be a lot easier if we just show up and go sit down and enjoy the service on a Sunday morning. But
I think it comes back to the putting him first, and the way we put him first is putting others first.
Sure. How we treat people is a reflection of what we think of God.
Of what we think of him. Yeah. And so they set that example with the sacrifices.
How they sacrificed was a reflection of what they thought about God.
Yeah.
They didn't think much about God, but we have these religious expectations that we have to do. Mm-hmm. So we'll give whatever leftover junk we have, and that'll work.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't work.
Something about
Malachi says,
what do we put first? What's our priority?
It was even so much that, well, and I'll get into this a little bit on Sunday. One of the verses that really stands out to me in the book of Malachi is God declaring, okay, remember, God who set up this covenant, who has designed this system, he says, how I wish someone would just shut the temple doors so you can't make these stupid sacrifices anymore. He didn't say stupid, he said worthless.
Worthless, yeah.
How I just wish you would shut the doors. And not too much longer after the book of Malachi, God brought that about.
Yeah.
He caused those doors to be shut. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, he put something else in place much, much better. Mm-hmm. Because he became one of us in Christ. And he lived that perfect, unblemished life and offered himself literally as a sacrifice on my behalf and yours.
Yeah.
To pay the penalty that we can't pay. He did away with that sacrificial system by making himself the ultimate sacrifice. But then he defeated death. And he didn't just defeat death for like himself. Well, I want Jesus to still be alive, my son, so I'm going to break my rules here and I'm going to pull him out of death. No, he made that victory over death available to all of us who will unify with him in our lives. And that happens when we make ourselves the living sacrifice that he deserves.
Yeah.
By living with integrity, by living faithfully to what he calls us to do and to be, and a lot more that we'll talk about in the next 2 weeks.
Yep.
So.
Yeah. So we really want to encourage you to read through Malachi again. It does not take long.
four chapters.
Yeah.
The fourth one is barely a whole chapter by itself, so really 3.5 chapters.
Yeah.
I think that John printed out a timer, like a sheet that shows how much time it takes to read each book of the Bible. I think it was like 11 or 12 minutes. So
Yeah.
you can definitely read Malachi. I would encourage you to read through that this week in preparation for Sunday, and be ready for hopefully some good discussion.
Yeah.
And
There are a lot of things coming up this month. If you weren't here yesterday or Sunday morning, please go to Facebook, Westway's Facebook page. Look for information there. Look for the events that are coming up. Go to the email, the weekly email. Make sure you read the weekly email. And
that'll be coming to your email box tomorrow.
And
if it doesn't, that means that you haven't signed up for it, or something got hijacked somewhere along the way. But,
we need to know that.
So you can call the office and make sure that you get signed up. If you don't have that by tomorrow afternoon, you probably want to do that, because that's going to be it has been, and moving forward, it's going to continue to be one of the primary ways that we have to get information to everybody.
So thank you for joining us. Look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Each week, we've seen a few more people regather with us, and that's been fun.
And we want to continue to remind everybody when we come here on Sundays, if you can get here a little bit early, so that we don't have everybody crowding through the door at the same time. That is very helpful as far as distancing. We are in Nebraska, I think, moving into the next phase on Friday, and so that will be in effect on Sunday. That might not change a lot of what we do on Sunday morning.
Right,
there may be some minor things.
Not right away, anyway.
Really, if you can show up a little bit early, so that everybody's entry is a little more spaced out. Want to remind you, when you come in, there are some rows that are blocked off to not sit in. If you're in a group, like your family group, we want you to sit with your family groups, but then each family group is going to be distanced from the next one, so that we're not sharing germs. So we want to continue to be vigilant about that. We have restarted our nursery and our wee ones.
Mm-hmm.
We're not quite ready for the Noah's Park and the up to first grade groups. If you'd like to help with those, give me a call and we'll talk about that some more. We're getting close to time to get those started again. So there's still time to get on the schedule if you are wanting to help with that. But we're being really intentional and really careful with how we do that with our kids. Mm-hmm. As we've seen the schools kind of navigate, how are we going to interact with kids? How are we going to have kids interacting with each other? We're being equally cautious about how we're doing that in a room. We're not packing a room full of 30 kids that holds 30 kids.
Again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for praying for us. We'll be praying for you. We ask that you proclaim Christ wherever you are. Be involved in the mission that He's called us to. So have a great week.
See you later.